afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Trend Spotting. This is a series with the India Habitat Center and the Hearth Advisors. We have these lectures every month. The topic for this one is on women in academia, and we have a very interesting panel. Tonight's lecture is going to begin with Professor Anna Philpott, and she's going to take us through a little bit of her science and a little bit of her journey. I don't want to preempt what she's going to say, but I'll leave it to her to say more than that. After that, we'll have Dr. Vibhuti Patel moderating a panel, which Anna will also join, which has a very interesting mix of people from a little bit of an eclectic background, but all discussing the same issue, which is women in academia. And we have Dr. Yadav, Mr. Kamath, Dr. Sindhu, and Professor Philpott joining Vibhuti Patel on the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Anna Philpott.
Well, I'd like to thank Shashank and the organisation for giving me this opportunity to tell you a little bit about my journey in science, how I ended up where I am, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with the other panel members about the rewards and challenges on the way. So my name is Anna Philpott. I'm Professor of Cancer and Developmental Biology, and I have a laboratory in the Stem Cell Institute and an appointment in the Department of Oncology. And I spend some of my time doing research now, but I spend most of my time being the head of the School of Biological Sciences, which is a major job. It's got 9 departments and 5 institutes. It's a sixth of the University of Cambridge. I still find it astonishing that I'm standing here telling you that that's what I do now, and I'll tell you how I ended up getting there. So I started off at this place, Sutton High School for Girls. I was very keen on science from an early age because I found science easier than I found the humanities. I think you like things that you're good at, and I was very curious, and I just found that it was something that came more naturally to me. I think that it was actually, this was in the 70s and early 80s, I think it was important that I was at a school for girls because most of the senior scientists of my generation in Cambridge, maybe in the UK, I don't know, disproportionately came from all girls schools, and I think that it was easier to take an interest in science and not feel like you were sticking out if you were in an environment where everyone was a girl. I don't know many people who at that time went to mixed schools and went into science. I think that has completely changed now, which is definitely a change for the better, but that was definitely a vibe that I got when I was growing up. So here I am, school picture there, with all the other girls from my school. As far as I know, I kind of know what many or most of the people in my year have done at school, because we had a number of reunions. I don't actually know of any other scientists that came out of my cohort at my school. So I was lucky enough to get a place at Selwyn College, Cambridge, which is where I did my undergraduate degree. It's a very beautiful college, a little bit out of the centre of town. And I did a PhD after I'd taken a degree in natural sciences, where I did both biological sciences and chemistry. So one of the huge strengths of natural sciences at Cambridge is our ability to take courses right across the scientific disciplines, and I think that was very important for my development as a scientist. And then I did a PhD in the somewhat less architecturally distinguished Department of Zoology, with a very distinguished scientist called Ron Lasky, who introduced me to scientific love of my life that I'll introduce you to in a moment. Very notable thing happened 6 months into I only had 3 years of money for my PhD. 6 months into my PhD, the lab burnt down. And that was quite exciting. I personally didn't burn the lab down. One of the other PhD students burnt the lab down. But we basically lost everything. And that was a bit traumatic, I think, but in some ways, good time to have the lab burned down, because no one achieved very much in the first 6 months of their PhD, and everyone felt sorry for me, so that was good. So during my PhD, I was looking at the act of fertilization and what happens to the DNA inside sperm when the sperm links to the egg. And I was using an organism which is the Xenopus frog. So Xenopus is a South African claw-toed frog that can lay eggs at any time of the year when you inject it with hormones. And in fact, if you inject with pregnant women's urine, they will lay eggs because they respond to the gonadotrophin. And it used to be used as a pregnancy test before we got modern molecular methods. But we have, I still have, lots of tanks of frogs in the basement. And when we wanted to do an experiment, you get the frog out, you inject it with gonadotrophin, and in the morning it will lay lots of eggs, and you can in vitro fertilize the eggs. And then you can look at development of the embryos. And if I can get my video to work, this is what the early development looks like. So this happens over the course of, time-lapse over the course of maybe 3 hours, 3-4 hours, depending on the temperature. And you can see why I got hooked on working on this experimental organism, because it's just absolutely beautiful. And so what you can do with this organism is you can inject genes into it, and you can see what effect do the genes have on the development of the tadpole. So that was what I started doing for my PhD. And at the end of my PhD, I wanted to, during my PhD, I was fortunate to meet the other love of my life. Yeah, one love is the frog. The other love is my husband here, Ben Simons. He was at Selwyn College with me. I don't know how many people here have ever been to Cambridge and know the college system. So there's a few of you. So I applied to Christ College and I got rejected and taken out of the pool by Selwyn. That means that you don't get your first choice college, but a second choice college takes you. My husband applied to Christ and he got rejected and taken out of the pool by Selwyn. So I like to think that that was, serendipitous fate brought us together. He was a theoretical physicist. He was living in the student hostel that I moved into, 31 Grange Road, Selwyn College, and that was where we met. And then we both moved to America for postdocs. So I flew overseas, went to Harvard Medical School, where I worked with an incredible scientist called Mark Kirshner here. He is the person I think has influenced me most scientifically in my entire career. He's an absolute genius. He had a lab absolutely packed full of alpha males, and he didn't have that many women, and if you were going to survive you had to become an alpha male. So this is not really Mark's fault, but it was the fault of the other people that were in the laboratory, I think. And there I was still working on frogs. And my husband went to MIT just over the water in Boston, where he carried on being a theoretical physicist. And then after 3 years, he came back to St. John's College, got a lectureship in Cambridge. I stayed on in Harvard for another 3 years. But then I flew back, started my own lab in 1998 in the Department of Oncology, and I became a fellow of Clare College. My husband already had a job in Cambridge. It was absolutely critical that I was able to find an independent job in the same institution. I mean, how lucky is that we both got to come back to Cambridge and both got positions in the same university. So that was just excellent. So the other critical thing that happened slightly after 1998, but not too far, I didn't have any pictures to hand, but we have 2 children. I've got a boy and a girl. The boy just went to university, which is very liberating, I would say. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the science we do in the lab. So we're interested in development of the nervous system, and we look at development of the nervous system. We started looking in the frog. So stem cells are these magical cells that can become anything in the body, but we're interested in the stem cells that derive from actually when you're a little embryo, smaller than you could see, from the back of your neck. And they're called the neural crest cells. And the cells there are the cells that want to become the nerves of your peripheral nervous system. So they decide they're going to become nerves because of signals they receive from sitting in the back of your neck. And then they migrate around your body and divide a lot. But they don't function as nerves until they reach their final point and they settle down and they stop dividing and they become fully functional nerves. So I'm interested in this whole process. So I'm interested, but in particular I'm interested in what controls the decision of those cells to stop dividing and to settle down and to become fully functional neurons. What is that basic fundamental process during embryonic development. So, not surprisingly, I've been looking at this in the frog. And here in purple, you can see these are nerve cells, which we've stained for a special marker that show when the nerve cells become mature. And this is like a very early embryo. Imagine that this is a human embryo. This is before your spinal cord folds up, and the nerves form in these stripes, and then your spinal cord folds up, and then you end up with a spinal cord. So that's what we're looking at here. And we can take these tadpoles and we can inject them with different genes and see what effect those different genes have on the formation of mature nerves. And that's what we're looking at here. This is a tadpole. This time we're looking straight on its face. And under you can see the little purple dots over there where there's no injection. That's how many nerves we normally have at this stage in development. You can inject a nerve gene, and you can see that there's a few extra purple spots because we've managed to produce a few extra nerves. But on this one, we've worked out the chemical signals that are stuck to our gene that determine how active it is. And we can manipulate those signals and make the gene much, much more active. And you can see how many more nerve cells there are in that tadpole. So, you know, in one slide, this summarizes maybe five years of work, which is that we understood the signals that control the ability to produce mature nerves. So it's a very fundamental and basic question in science. And I gave a seminar in Cambridge on this basic biology, explaining that we knew this mechanism. And this gentleman came along. He's called Guy Blanchard. He's a scientist in Cambridge. He was a postdoc at the time. He had a son called Locke who had a devastating sort of cancer called neuroblastoma. His son sadly died of this. But he thought that my research into the basic biology of the nervous system might be applicable to what goes wrong in this cancer neuroblastoma. So I didn't know anything about neuroblastoma or very much about neuroblastoma when he came to my seminar, but I said, well, I'm going to have a look. And so I went to the library and I discovered that neuroblastoma, it occurs in infants, so very small children between birth basically and 5, 6 years old, so terrible time to be getting cancer, not that it's great at any time. It causes 15% of all childhood cancer deaths. But even the children that survive, they get treated with very high doses of chemotherapy, which leaves them with all sorts of lifelong problems, metabolic problems, reproductive problems, stunted growth, those kinds of things. And so we really, really need to improve treatment for this disease. And the other thing I discovered was neuroblastoma arises from these cells that normally form at the back of your neck and migrate through your body, the ones that I had been studying in the frog. So we wondered, with the knowledge that we'd gained in normal development, we knew that what causes neuroblastoma is that these dividing cells get stuck. So they can't undergo this process to stop dividing and become proper nerves. They just carry on dividing, and that's what causes the tumors. So I hadn't thought about neuroblastoma in relation to my basic science, but I was very interested in it because this is my niece. She's called Laura Simons, and she had neuroblastoma when she was 3 years old. I didn't really think about the biology of the disease. All I thought about was Laura, but she was cured fantastically, and she's now training to be a vet. But of course, Guy coming to my seminar and the fact that my niece had neuroblastoma made me very motivated to be wondering whether my basic science could be applicable to neuroblastoma. So we asked, can we put our basic findings in the frog to practical use? And I probably wouldn't be telling you this story if we hadn't managed to do it. So we wondered whether we could develop a new therapy that would take our cells that are stuck at this developmental stage here, dividing a lot, and force them to carry on down their normal trajectory, just to stop dividing and become mature nerves. And indeed, we've now managed to do that. This is the only data I'm going to show you in the slide. This is what neuroblastoma cells look like in a dish. The blue shows the nucleus of the cell and shows how rapidly they're dividing. Now, green is a stain for mature neurons. So we can use a drug that causes our cells to mature, and when we add that to neuroblastoma cells, it causes them to mature into nerve cells that no longer divide. And this happens in neuroblastoma cells in a dish. It also happens in mice that have been genetically modified to develop this devastating disease. And now we're about to take our drug into clinical trials, and we hope to add it to the existing treatment regimen, and we hope that it's going to significantly reduce relapse for neuroblastoma, which is most of the children die after they relapse after first round treatment. This is an incredibly exciting thing for me to be able to do. So I'm a firm believer that if you understand biology, you'll improve the treatment of disease, and that you should always remain curious. I like this quote. But now I have moved on to a university leadership role in addition to my research program, which hopefully is being conducted by my researchers that are home in my lab while I'm here talking to you. So the University of Cambridge has 6 schools: biological sciences, clinical medicine, technology, physical sciences, arts and humanities and social sciences. I don't know why the humanities people couldn't agree who'd get the name, but anyway. And it's made up of 9 departments and 5 institutes right in the centre of Cambridge. It's my lab up there over at the Geoffrey Cheer Biomedical Centre. I spend Monday at the lab, and Tuesday to Friday I spend running the School of Biological Sciences and being part of the senior leadership team of the university. A job that actually I really love. How did I end up there? Well, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, but I must be doing something right, because normally you do a 4-year term and they've just asked me to do another 4 years. I am the only female head of school out of 6 in Cambridge, and Biological Sciences is the only school that has ever had a female head of school. So there's been one other female head of school, and it was the one before me in the School of Biological Sciences. And I think that's a pretty telling statistic. 50% of our undergraduates are women, but still yet to filter through to the senior leadership of the university. We have one above the heads of school are the pro-vice chancellors. We have 5 pro-vice chancellors. One of them is a woman. And we've just got a new female vice chancellor. So that's good, but I think that there is still some way to go. And I'll just finish with a couple of lessons that I've learned through my career. I really like my science. Science has been great, but I actually really enjoy university leadership. I really like being able to make a difference to younger scientists and trying to make the place work smoothly to enable people to do their best work and live their best lives. It's very fulfilling, I think. And you know, research is very unpredictable. You can't tell if it's going to work or not. It can be incredibly frustrating. But in university leadership, you normally can, if you put your mind to it, you're going to be able to get something done, and that's good. I firmly believe that failure is good for you. In my experience, I've failed at many things in my career. For instance, I failed to get into Christ College, and that worked out okay in the end. I think that if you don't fail at something, you've never tried anything that's hard enough, and so I think that there is no shame in failure. Everyone should fail often, and it shows that you've tried to do really difficult things. I'm very much a believer in what goes around comes around, and that people should treat people well and with respect, because if you expect to be treated that way, that's how you should treat other people. And I try and live that in my leadership role, and I try and call people out when I don't believe that they're living up to that kind of mantra. And I also have found, as a woman in science and a woman in university leadership, that you need to be your own cheerleader. That it's unusual for anyone to tap you on the shoulder and say, oh, you're doing a great job, or I think you should do this. You know, you have to develop that inner confidence. And if you don't have that inner confidence, you have to pretend that you've got it. So that's all I wanted to say. Over to you, Vibhuti.
Anna, thank you so much. And now I'd like to call Vibhuti and the panelists. If you could come up on stage, please. Dr. Sindhu, Dr. Yadav. I'm going to leave it to Vibhuti to introduce the panelists properly. And now, Vibhuti, we are in your hands. All the best, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shashank. And thank you to Anna for your talk. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. I'm going to prompt you now that there will be time for questions from the floor. So please have a think about what you might like to ask Anna or any of our panelists, because we will be opening up for questions shortly. So I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel first, before we start the discussion. We've obviously heard all about Anna. Also with us on the panel today, here next to me, is Dr. Surveen Ghumman Sindhu. Surveen is a Senior Director and Head of Department for Infertility and IVF at Max Healthcare. And the truth is that she has so many medical qualifications and so much experience that I'd spend the rest of the time listing it all. So hopefully as we have the discussions, we can learn a bit more about your expertise. We also have with us, and it's not a token man on the panel, I think it's very important to have men in the conversation when we're talking about gender equality. We have Nandan Kamath, who is a lawyer specialising in sports technology and media. He's also managing trustee of the non-profit Go Sports Foundation. And we've included him on this panel because he has some very interesting perspectives on injuries that occur for women in professional sport, perhaps because there's been a bit of a blind spot in terms of understanding that this is something that could happen. So look forward to hearing more about that later. And just down the end there is Dr. Gitanjali Yadav. She's a staff scientist at the National Institute of Plant Genome Research here in Delhi. She has a PhD from the National Institute of Immunology, MSc and BSc in biomedical research and botany, respectively, from University of Delhi. I think I've got that right. And our connection to Geeta is that she spent time at Cambridge and as a fellow of St Edmund's College and a researcher there. So I'd like to open with a question for you, Anna. Given that we've just heard about your journey and your leadership role now, in that whole process, in building your career, what have you found most fulfilling?
I think, I mean, it's a cliche, right? But the thing that I found most fulfilling is trying to help develop the career of more junior scientists. I mean, I'm hoping the thing I'll find most fulfilling is if I get my thing into clinical trial and I save the life of some children. That will definitely be the most fulfilling thing. But as I haven't yet quite managed to get to that point, it's been wonderful to have so many young, talented people in my laboratory, and they come from all over the world. And particularly the women often lack the confidence that they deserve, because they're equally talented, sometimes more talented than some of my male colleagues I've had working in the lab. So I think it's equally important to develop their scientific skills, but also to develop their personal inner strength so that they can take their place at the table with everybody else. So I think that's what I found most fulfilling.
Thank you. Might come back to touch on that later. Geeta, I'd like to ask my next question of you. You're somebody who has experience of working in the environment in Cambridge that Anna's been talking about, but also very experienced in a leadership role here in academia and research. What have you found to be the opportunities and the challenges as a woman? And what have you taken from both of those environments?
Okay, yeah, I think you can hear me. Thank you, Vibhuti, and thank you, Shashank, for having me here this evening. It's lovely to have listened to you, Anna. That was a brilliant story about your life. To answer your question, Vibhuti, I'll just give a short background on the fact that I never left India. I studied in India, as you said, graduation, postgrad, PhD, then got a job in India, didn't do a postdoc. After 10 years, I realized that there is some stagnation in what you're doing. And that was when, after 10 years of being a group leader within India, that I chose to become, I took up this lectureship at the University of Cambridge, Department of Plant Sciences, and spent 5 years there as a DBT Cambridge lecturer, after which COVID happened, and then I returned to India. And I'm back in India now at my original position at the National Institute of Plant Genome Research. The thing, having been in both places, first the opportunities, the first thing that literally hit me, was the huge regard for academia that you have in the West. And in Cambridge, of course. You realize that people, when they meet you, one always says brand name doesn't matter, but I suppose brand name matters. And I also, because of being in Cambridge, you get the opportunity to travel and see so many other universities. And when I travel to the Nordic countries, I realize there even more that academia is hugely held in regard. That's something we don't see very much in India. For some reason, being a professor, being a teacher, being a scientist is just held as, all right, one of the other things that you're doing in life, but maybe you could have been, a bureaucrat. But outside of India, I see so much regard for being an academic. I felt better about myself. So that was one huge thing that happened to me, and I completely became, as Anna has said, felt far more cheery about myself. The second thing I noted was the incredible confidence in students. Now, the students that we have in India, toppers everywhere, competitive to the best, and as I see, they go about all over the world, and whatever different places I've visited now, I find that regard for Indian students and their abilities are huge, but within India, these students don't have that kind of confidence. Outside of India, at Cambridge, at Oxford, at Norwich, at Edinburgh, wherever I've traveled, I find that students are far, far, far more confident and assured of themselves, and I think it's because they get to meet and interact with Nobel laureates almost every day or every week or every year, at least twice a year. Here in India, we do not have so many opportunities for students to maybe travel, present their work, meet people outside of their own little silos of subjects or things that they're doing. That was the part that I felt, whereas the students are brilliant here. And when they go outside, they realize, like me, that, wow, I think I'm good. But not within here somehow. So I feel that has to change. That level of self-assurance has got to come within here. The upshots, the things that I feel after having come back, is that we've got a lot of funding here in India for research, which I don't, we've got core grants, which at the department, we did not have core grants. You've got to always write for grants, get funded from wherever you are, compete for funds. In India, if you're on a tenure, you have a core grant available to you as a researcher, and I can continue my research without worrying about it. Outside of India, you have to actually think about getting a PhD student. Where will the funding for the PhD student come? Here in India, we have these national exams that the CSIR has, that the DBT has, the DST has. If you choose to do a PhD in India, you need to clear one of these 4, 5, 6 different exams, and you get funded yourself independently. And that's a brilliant, brilliant thing that India has that I have not really seen outside of the country. So that's the kind of, did that answer your question about the opportunities and the challenges that I've experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we might come back to touch on that.
Yeah, I can keep thinking about them
later on as well. Surveen, if I could come to you next. You could give us 2 different perspectives on the topic of women and perhaps inequality. Firstly, your experience as a female leader in the field in which you work, but also the field in which you work is very much about women's health. And so I'd also be interested in your perspective on blind spots in women's healthcare or inequality in the way that women are treated within healthcare systems. So it'd be really interesting to hear your experiences in both of those things, your development as a leader in your field, but also the field itself and what it's taught you.
So, Vibhuti, first of all, thank you for having me in this very interesting forum. As doctors, we often don't get this opportunity. We're usually doing medical seminars. So I would actually like to go back 37 years. This was 1996. I had passed out from my medical school and I was doing my internship. One of the postings we have is a village posting where we are posted as interns and we treat the village. My interest was always to be a pediatrician and to look after children. Although I think, what was heartbreaking in that particular field was that you work on a child for 24 hours in your internship. When you come back the next day, the child is no longer there. But that was not the reason why I didn't become a pediatrician. During the village posting, there was a pattern which was set. The father would come with the child, I would see the child, I would write the medicine, give the diagnosis. He would walk across to the male intern and he would say, can you check this? Oh, Goody is a little girl. Goody ne likha hai, can you check whether it is right or wrong? And I sat there and I analyzed, when can I be the prime doctor? In which field? And I realized these traditional men will never take their wives to another man to get examined. So gynae was the only option where women are prime. That is the truth about India, at least then, 36 years back. Has India changed? Well, 2011, I had gone to Patna to a small IVF center, basically to study how the smaller centers work. And I was there for about a month, and on my first or second day, this man came with his wife, and she had reached premature menopause, so we told her that you need a donor egg if you want a child. I think I was leaving, or a day before I left, that man came in again. He had a young girl with him, and he told the doctor, and he said it in Hindi, of course, but I'm saying it in English. He says, in our village, you don't need donors. This is the sister of my wife, I've got married to her. So that's India in 2011, in the periphery. Has India changed 2022-23 post-COVID? I got 6 to 7 mothers aged 40 to 45 who had daughters, but they had lost their adolescent or grown-up sons. They all came with a similar request. We want donor eggs and we want to produce a son again. The daughter did not compensate. I did not get a single mother who mourned a daughter. Not a single mother. I think onco, you're very, very familiar with it. When they undergo chemotherapy, radiotherapy, they lose their fertility. So we do a fertility preservation before they undergo a chemotherapy. That is, we preserve their eggs and their sperms, man, woman, both, so that they can come in later and they can have children. So when we get onco-fertility cases, the sperms are always frozen. Always. The parents will make sure that the sperms are frozen. With the eggs, only 10% return after we counsel them. Because the egg is not important. Even today, it is not important. What about posthumous reproduction? Like the partner dies and, or the child dies and then the sperms are lying. They come only for the sperms. They've never come for the eggs. So has India changed? Yes, it has. The women have changed. About 5-6 years back, I used to get 1 or 2 girls coming in for egg freezing. Today I get one or two a year. Today I get 1 or 2 a month coming in. We want to preserve our eggs. We don't have partners. When we get married, we'll come back and use the eggs. But surprisingly, this year, I got 2 girls who came in, got their egg freezing done, and they didn't say we don't have partners. They said we'll come back after 2 years when we finished our career or something, and we'll take a donor sperm and have a family. So India's changing. But the women are changing. Have the men changed? Well, infertility is always the woman's problem, always. And she'll walk into my office with a thick file. Everything investigated, including invasive tests, surgeries, nothing wrong with her. Her partner's sitting next to her and with a thin file. And I'll say, what about the semen analysis? The reply will be either, oh, it's not done, or he'll pull out the file and show me that the problem lies with the male. I can recognize these couples right in the beginning when they walk in that, yes, this is the problem there. So you can't, unless you change the man, you can't change this thing. It has to change overall. That is the only way to change it. Our current speciality has now come under a law in India. It's known as the ART bill. It came out in 2021. Is there gender bias in that bill? Well, they say a woman can donate till the age of 35, her eggs, and a man can donate a sperm till the age of 45. There is a gender bias because even an aging sperm is a problem. Then, as far as a single woman reproduction is concerned, availing IVF, she can only avail it till 45 years of age. A married woman till 50 years. What's the difference? Well, the logic given was that economically the married woman is stronger. Surrogacy, again, this is probably a reverse gender bias. Single males are not allowed. They are not allowed to avail surrogacy and have children. what happened earlier with Karan Johar is no longer allowed now. And with women, it is that if she was ever married, either divorced or she's lost her husband, she can avail surrogacy. But if she was never married, she can't avail surrogacy because she never intended to have a family. So these are the pitfalls in our legal system which have come just now. This is 2021. It's an excellent law, very much needed by India, because we had so many mushrooming IVF centers and a lot of unethical work going on. I think it was the need of the hour. But there are these little things, subtle things. And IVF in itself is like a reminder to the woman that you are the one who's meant to do everything. You're the one who's meant to undergo the injections. You're the one who's to give the success. If it fails, it's you who's responsible. So there is so much gender bias here that it's unimaginable what's happening.
Thank you for that comprehensive picture, which is a lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of that. I'm sure people in the audience will have questions around that. But thank you for being so frank. Nandan, can I bring you in here to talk a little bit about your perspective? You know, I'll be honest, I hadn't really considered it before, this particular blind spot in gender bias around injuries in sport for women, in professional sport. Could you just tell us a little bit more from your experience?
Yeah, I'll just come to that. I think I'll just lay a little bit of the sort of the lay of the land first. I think, first of all, delighted to be here. I'm the outlier, not just from gender, but I think I'm the only non-doctor, so probably the least educated in the panel. But I think this, why does this matter at all in terms of representation, I would say, in research and in sport at all? So a few months ago, I was just watching the IPL with my young daughter, 7-year-old, and watching it. IPL is the Indian Premier League cricket here. And she says, I don't want to watch this because it's all boys playing. So just in terms of representation matters. And I think we've had the Women's Premier League start and what it means for young people watching the sport. But at a broader level, why does sport matter and why do the battles for gender in sport matter? Many would argue that sport is really a representation of society. That it's really a mirror that shows us who we are and what we care about, but also in some sense a window to look out and see how other people sort of live their lives. But to me, I believe like sport is not just downstream of culture, but actually contributes to the creation of culture. So in many ways is upstream of culture and is quite uniquely placed, particularly on gender, as many of the largest battles on gender actually play out in sport first. And I think one of the biggest ones is who is male and who is female. Most starkly plays out in sport, and really hard lines have to be drawn somewhere. I can talk a little bit about that. But there are many other issues, even, for example, whether you're allowed to wear the hijab while playing sport. So all of these actually have come up 5, 10, 15 years ago in sport, and in my view, the battles in sport are fought very often well before they are fought more broadly in society. And in many ways, that's why it matters to study sport, to be represented in the study of sport, and to have sport designed in a way that actually matters to you. Because I think the battles have to be played on sort of fair ground to reach, I would say, reasonable conclusions. And coming to your specific question, and I'd like to just put out a few different statistics. So when we look at representation in sport, there are many different aspects. So one is even just levels of participation. The second is retention and why people continue to play sport. And the third is success. So how do people succeed? When you talk about participation, there are many, many barriers, and the same barriers might exist for retention. And some of them are just things like safety, injury, other aspects. And one of the statistics that comes up in research a fair bit is that women and girls have 3 to 6 times larger propensity to ACL injuries, which is knee injuries, ligament tears, than boys and men. And actually this just is a statistic that's come out but has no explanation. A fair bit of research has now gone into, this is particularly to do with football, so a sport which is using your feet. So a fair bit of research has now slowly started to happen around the design of the football boot. And very recently, a few brands have started building women's football shoes. But otherwise, it's very much women playing in a man's world of boots, football boots that are designed for men. But from the research, it again suggests that the way a woman's foot is designed or requires a very different type of shoe. So different ankle support, different sort of support to the metatarsals, and different places where you would place the studs. So it could be something like that, but it also could have multiple different reasons. And the reality is we haven't researched these topics to the depth they need, because in many ways, and like the more I read about this, it's not a subject I look at quite deeply, but it was, I think the message that comes through most starkly is that women are not just small men. So you're essentially designing sport in a way that you're just looking at women and trying to plug them in as sort of biologically smaller men, and you're fitting into a world which is designed, a world of sport with its rules, with its sort of size of football. Like just to be clear, like women's cricket is played with a different size ball than men's cricket. But with football, it's the same size football, it's the same size goal, it's the same size field, where there's arguments that the rules could be quite different for women. They have to work harder on a larger field. They could be better players if you had a smaller ball, just biologically smaller in many cases. The goalkeeper maybe is unable to reach both ends of a football goal, unlike many of the men. So in many ways, this is a world that is designed, sport is a world designed primarily for men. And just to be clear, the first couple of Olympics, there were no women. The theory was that women would sort of get injured and were too frail to play sport. For many years, they were actually barred from marathons because from a lack of any scientific evidence, there was this perception of men that women might die if they actually ran the ran the marathon. So, I mean, from a lack of, like women's sport fit into men's sport, and in many ways that notion of trying to fit into existing architectures of physical sport, the rules of sport, still persists, because, and in some sense it is from the lack of academic study and a lack of sort of deep understanding of like having representation in research in some ways.
Thank you very much. And I think your point about just fitting women into something that was already designed with men primarily in mind, I think that probably applies to much, much more than just sport, and I can see the other panellists nodding as well. What I'd like to do now is actually, rather than me just sitting here asking questions, I'd like to see if there are any questions from the audience. I'm sure people have really digested what they've heard so far this evening. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to ask a question of our panel? Just at the back there, could we get a microphone? If you could just introduce yourself as well, that would be great, thank you.
Hello, I am Dr. Jagveer Rawat. I am at the moment the chief promoter of a national cooperative of innovation research and development. It's called Bharat Innovation Research and Development. My question is to Nandan Kamath ji. I come from state of Haryana, and we recently have a university, Sports University of Haryana, with the international mandate. At recent times, you may be knowing, one of the Supreme Court judge went to Goa, and he said the university should have governance and law in sports established somewhere. So in that backdrop, including a lot of controversy went into the women players from wrestling from Haryana. I would like that something in this panel for women particularly. They have come out very well in Haryana. There was a lot of taboo to participate in wrestling particularly, and all women wrestlers were there. So I would like to ask this question to you as well as maybe Anna also, that something in sports governance and physiology, can something be done on that? And particularly gender-specific issues can be,
Addressed and studied.
Raised.
So, I mean, I think it's a great question. The subject itself is so ripe for study, and I'll just give you one example and why I would say women need to be not just the subject of study, but the people doing the studying as well. Because I think there's multiple different stages in academic world where you're writing, you're editing, so the editorial boards. What is the type of research that is being looked at? I'll give you a pretty stark statistic, and this is from, I know wrestling is a very physical pursuit, and the women of Haryana have done extremely well. But you look at a sport like chess, right? So theoretically, there should be no big gender differentiation in the sport of chess. But the reality is that there's only 5% of participants in competitive chess are women. Only 1% of grandmasters are women. And at most points in the last 30 years, only 1 out of the top 100 ranks in the world has been a woman, right? So this logically doesn't make sense because, I mean, most sports are gender differentiated from the perspective of upper body weight, right? So you are stronger, so you swim faster, or you box, or you wrestle. So what could explain just the significant difference? And I think many sort of men studied it, but then I found a fascinating study by a woman called Anne Maas. So it was 2 women and a man who actually did a study. Essentially took 42 men and 42 women playing chess over the internet. And they played multiple rounds against people of equal standing. 21 of the women were told that they were playing men, but 21 of the women were actually playing men, but were told that they were playing women, right? So very uniquely designed study, which a man would probably have not thought of, a unique study. And what they found was that when women thought they were playing women, their performance improved 50%. So this had nothing to do with actual whether you were good enough. And this actually led to a whole theory around stereotype threat. So this notion of you believe in your own stereotype and it makes you perform worse because you don't want to be more aggressive, you don't want to be more assertive. And the desire to be aggressive and assertive are important skills in the game of chess, is to assert your position, to go and play your part. So, I mean, a fascinating study which actually opens up multiple different questions, even coming down to how do you design a chess competition? Should women have different competitions, or do you try and merge them in, and if they just don't do well against men, you just have lower participation rates? So it's led to chess being a very unique sport where you have open competition, which anyone can participate in, and women's only competition. It's a very unique way of designing sport, but it comes from well-done research, which encourages, I'd say, greater participation and a greater chance of progression.
Thanks, Nandan. Anna, if I could ask you to comment here, because I think there's a point touched upon there about studies that have been done or research that has been done and how that's designed. And I think that speaks to your point about some of your experiences of working in a lab that was just full of alpha males, the fact that you, still in this day and age, in a leadership position at Cambridge, you're unique being a woman. I just wonder if you could comment a bit on your experiences and this idea of how you build teams that can actually deliver different perspectives.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important that you don't just value people that all look like a particular stereotype, which often is not the stereotype that I look like. I think it's important to have teams that are gender balanced, and also teams that from people with different perspectives from all across the world, because people bring different things to that team. And there's lots of academic research that shows that teams that are diverse are more successful at dealing with difficult problems because people approach things in different ways. And I think that confidence is important. When I say confidence, it's not sort of being that person who's out there asserting themselves on other people, that kind of sort of overt confidence, but more sort of internal confidence that your voice deserves to be heard. So an interesting study I read about was that they set people a maths test, and half them, for men and women, and half the people had to write their name on the paper before they started the test. And what they found was when the women had to write their name on the paper, they did significantly worse than the women that didn't write their name on the paper, because they had been reminded at the beginning of the maths test that they were women. But this didn't happen with the men, because the women had some kind of had imbibed some kind of message that women aren't so good at maths, which of course isn't true. But I thought that was fascinating from a psychological point of view. So I think developing and maintaining your inner confidence is critical for sort of getting over the difficult times in your career. And lots of people don't feel confident on the inside, including men. Men seem better at faking it, and so I always encourage my female trainees to fake it. If they don't feel it, fake it, and nobody else will be able to tell the difference.
Thank you. Other questions in the room? Okay.
Thank you, Anna, for coming all the way and presenting your beautiful research. Plus the panelists, I thank all of them. One comment about Mr. Kamath saying that, the women football players have to have the same shoes. My understanding is that the players get a special shoe designed for individuals. Now that's the technology which most of the players use. So this is just a comment. My question is addressed to the panelists. I feel that women are much more intelligent and brighter than men. So who is stopping you from doing good research? Because I find a lot of great research, epoch-making research are done by women like Madame Curie, I was discussing with you, Lise Meitner, Jocelyn Bell. In astrophysics, the one lady who discovered the stars and the distance of stars, and so on and so forth. So, especially in a European society where there is definitely less of gender bias, why is it that there are not many scientists? And in India, I find that, it's very interesting. In India, you go to a research institution, if there is a lady researcher, people give them a lot of, importance and credit and so on. So it may be very unfair to the male members saying that they are biased and they are stopping us from doing great work. So I would like to have a comment. Thank you.
I'd like to take
And
that
incidentally,
first.
I'm a
sure,
physicist.
Anna, you have...
I would like to introduce I'm Saxena, a physicist, and I went to civil service later on. In my lab, there was a lady who absolutely did outstanding work, and she is now in Stanford doing tremendous amount of work on particle physics. So there were a whole lot of people who were given a lot of encouragement. And one personal question, if you permit me, when are you going to win the Nobel for such an outstanding work? Thank you.
Anna, you better answer that first.
I think that's highly unlikely when I spend 4 days a week on 44 university committees, I would say. And one other thing I would say about Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who discovered the pulsar in Cambridge, she didn't get the prize for that. Her supervisor got the prize for that, even though she did the work. And that's, one of the reasons I think why you don't see so many female scientists. There are people doing the work, but perhaps they're not being given the credit for it.
I want to say... The thing that I want to say here is your point is very valid. We have been empowering women for a long time, and it is visible now in the stories that you tell and the stories that we've seen. And yet the difference, the catch, is that we see confident women all over the world, and I've really seen a lot of women within India, outside of India. The thing with women is that what we are facing right now, I believe, is not a crisis of confidence. We are confident. The crisis is a crisis of social expectation. And the stories that Nandan and Anna have told just now about, in your mind, being doubtful about yourself, it's the crisis of social. What are others expecting of me? My daughter and son, daughter plays better chess, but she will always allow him to win because she doesn't want to. She plays defensive, he plays offensive. He doesn't care, but she has this caring thing. And women are caregivers from time immemorial. But I believe personally that this social expectation word itself, it's the death of hope. It's the death of alternate futures. As Anna was saying, a failure leading to something else. And any kind of expectation is also the death of possibility. And I think that is what is keeping us behind. That's my point.
Also, just wanted to add clarity. So they did a study in the UK. 100% of professional footballer men had a shoe deal. Less than 50% of women had a shoe deal, and most of them were using the shoe that was made for men. So it's a designed shoe made for men. That was the deal they got as part of their sponsorship. And more than 50% did not have a shoe deal. So they were going to the store and buying a shoe to play professional football in.
I'd like to ask specifically if any women in the room have any questions for our panel. very respectful of the questions we've had so far. I'm just acutely aware that none of the women have yet raised their hands to ask a question. Okay, we'll take the one at the back first.
Hi.
Yeah, there we go.
Hi, I'm Shriya, I'm a journalist. So actually my question is for Mr. Nandan. So you were talking about how the cricket ball is smaller for women. And I was just wondering how much of these, how much of these like differences in size of balls or number of laps someone has to do while swimming, how much of that has to do with actual physicality and science, and how much does that have to do with gender bias? Because if I have to think about something personally, I had taken physical education in school, and the boys were made to run 4 rounds and the girls were made to run 3 rounds. So it's not that much of a difference, but there was still, that difference that was there. And this also got me thinking about the debates that are going on in the West about transgender men and women in sports. So what I'm trying to get at is how much of it is actually based on science and how much of it is based on bias when we reduce certain, when you reduce the size of balls, or you reduce the number of laps someone has to take, or court size, or whatever. And also, does that have something to do with the visibility of men's sports and women's sports? Do people want to watch men playing because it seems like it's more bigger and aggressive, or yeah?
I mean, I think there are multiple different questions. Just to answer that question, I don't know whether there's a right answer to say whether it's science or bias, but I would say it's positive. For example, in cricket, the average woman's hand is much smaller than a man's hand. And if you did not reduce the size and weight of the ball, it would be very difficult for a woman to be an off-spinner, for example. A full-size cricket ball, the fingers may not be able to reach across the entire seam. So I would see that as a good customization to actually increase the degree of skill. There's multiple papers suggesting that the football should actually be smaller for women, and that will end up hastening the pace of the game. Now, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So is women's sport better or worse? So for example, you take the sport of tennis, right? I don't think anyone would argue that men's tennis is better than women's tennis. They're just seen as almost different sports demanding different types of skills. But many other sports, you're comparing the women's sport to the man's sport and trying to hold it to a certain different, sort of an equal standard, uniform standard. So I think if you actually went and used a scientific approach to even figure out even simple things like, should all sports even be gender segregated? There are actually 2 Olympic sports that are not gender segregated. So one of the sailing events and one of the equestrian events, it's unisex. Everyone plays together. There are actually 2 sports at which women have consistently done better than men, which is 10-meter air rifle, which is the sport that Abhinav Bindra won the gold medal. Women's scores are higher on average. The winning scores are higher than the men's scores. And open water swimming. So women are better physiologically for open water swimming, where they're not pushing off the boards. So there are multiple different studies that you could argue are biased, or argue the failure to do it is actually the bias in not studying the subject. On the transgender issue, I mean, it's a very deep dive. I probably don't want to get there. But I think one of the studies, I'd just like to say that the study that actually kept Caster Semenya out of the Olympics was done by 2 men who actually were looking at androgen and its impact on middle distance running. They were from the World Athletics Science Committee. And like literally 2 years after they banned Caster Semenya, they actually corrected and had to more or less withdraw their paper because there wasn't enough causation. So also just understanding the aggression of actually pulling off research, and that rule was it was a Caster Semenya rule. She was winning too much, and they needed a rule to essentially get her to stop winning. So they literally brought it down. Duti Chand was also banned at one point. She won the case. So they brought it down to literally middle distance running, which is 400 meters to 1,500 meters. And the only one who really suffered was Caster Semenya. That research, which essentially gated Caster Semenya out of women's sport, was done by 2 men. So I mean, it's just a good example of you could call it bias in that case, and it wasn't even sound science, which was eventually peer reviewed and then corrected.
Anna, I think you've actually got a question of your own.
Yeah, I've got a question for Surveen, actually. So typically, what happens in history is that women will make gains in areas, and then there will be a backlash. So have you seen that during your career, and is there going to be a backlash, do you think, to the new reproductive rights laws?
Well, the laws in India are pretty rigid. We have tried, we put forward a lot of arguments. They haven't been taken so far. But if you talk about a backlash from the patients, is that
a backlash from society, really, where women are given new rights and freedoms, and then society rebels against that, and you get pushed back?
So I don't see that happening. I see them getting more and more freedom. I see them progressing. Like I said, I see them going for a family without the male. So that's what's happening in India now at this stage. And I don't think that this should have any backlash. It will probably open minds to a different culture.
Does this just happen in urban India, or is it happening in rural India?
Yes, it is happening only in urban India. Only in urban. But it is happening in urban India, quite a lot.
I think there was another question in the middle of the room, I think. So we'll go to the lady in the yellow.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Preetha. I'm also a journalist. My question is for all of the panelists. Like Dr. Yadav mentioned that we have been empowering women, but we still see that there are very few women in academia, especially in India and across the world. And as Professor Philpott also mentioned, that even in managerial positions in universities, there are still very few women. Even in studies, in samples, women are still not equally represented or as much as desired. So my question is about the policy ecosystem. There has been some improvement, some advancement when it comes to policy to ensure that there is proper inclusion of women in every scientific field. But where is that line between a hogwash that a government just puts out as right before during a political campaign, and an actual policy that has helped? If any of you will have any examples.
Who'd like to take that first? Anna? Okay, Anna and then Geeta.
So we have in the audience Alison from the British Council over there, who I was discussing last night with the fact that India is going to begin to engage with something called Athena Swan, which is what we've been using in the UK, a sort of a framework where institutions report on gender issues and gender representation, and they have action plans about what we can do to improve women's representation, particularly in science. I think this is a really good step. The most important thing I think that Athena Swan has done for us in Cambridge University, in my school, is that it has forced us, at the time it was forcing us, now we do it voluntarily, but forced us to collect the data. So before we had the data, it was all anecdote. And anecdote is not a helpful way to be creating policy, but the Athena Swan framework requires you to make an action plan, and you have to get it renewed every 5 years, so you have to show that you've made action on your action plan. But the downside of Athena Swan, as I was discussing with Alison yesterday, is that it tends to be the women that are put on the Athena Swan committee, and the women told to come up with the action plan, and the women told to implement the action plan. And in fact, this has to be men and women together. And so that's what we've learned during this process, that if we're going to make real progress, it has to be men and women. It can't be women trying to fix themselves or even women trying to fix the men. It has to be a community of men and women working together for more fairness.
Thank you, Anna, for bringing this up. That was another major difference when I traveled to Cambridge and worked at Cambridge as a lecturer. I noticed the huge well, almost to the point of battering, the inclusion and diversity discussions that happen. And when I came back to India during the pandemic, after the pandemic, I've been back in India and I have been part of the Gati program. It's called the Gati framework that India has formulated. I'm a member of the committee, and having had the Athena Swan experience in the UK, we have now 2 years ago, the DST, the Department of Science and Technology, as well as the Ministry of Science and Technology, have come together with these points, wherein every academic organization in India has got to, hopefully in the long run, they will be accredited by the NAC. Right now, everybody is being accredited by the NAC, and the NAC score is extremely important for students to choose which college or university they'll go to. The Gati score is going to be part of your NAC score coming forward. The pilot of the Gati has completed just a few months ago. Dr. Pratibha Jolly, who used to be the principal of Miranda House, was leading the entire Gati program for India, and she ensured that the Gati teams within universities and these pilot organizations would not be all women. By default, what Anna is saying is right. You just catch hold of some women and say, okay, these are our Gati representatives. That's not true. So the committees were made in such a way to have equal sampling, which brings me back to your other question about sampling in research. Anna and I were discussing this today. In sampling, research sampling, cohorts of people, you need to have now, essentially by the funding agency rules, equal numbers of men and women to be represented in any study that you're conducting. Nandan may know more about it.
No, I'd just like to add, I think your question is also about the legal ecosystem and other things happening. So when I was studying a little bit about the sort of the ecosystem with women and in science in particular, it showed a graph which is called a scissor graph. So at this point, there are more women at undergraduate level studying science than men. But at the master's level, they both join. And then as you progress further to PhDs, postdocs, and professorships, men far exceed women. So this scissor approach, and I think just from my experience at sport and other aspects, so what women face quite early on are disruptions. And I think you have to factor in disruptions, and that's where the legal system also comes into play. It could be maternity benefits, it could be, so I think that the real disruptions in women's lives are obviously marriage, migration that could occur from marriage, having a child, and these are sort of significant what you would call disruptions in your life, but also potentially in careers. And the question is, do you have a supportive framework at all those points of time to bring the person, to keep the person in their job and allow them to progress without, I would say, negative perception because the person's not able to stay for longer hours or any of those aspects. So I think there are elements of labor laws and other aspects which childcare. So do educational institutions provide childcare to their employees? I'm not sure that's true in many Indian institutions.
It's starting to be provided, but I still want to disagree with you, Nandan. To a large extent, the cutting down of numbers, and you're absolutely right. Huge toppers, school toppers, always girls. College toppers, always girls. Masters, yes, lots of girls. PhD, many girls. After that, it is the women who choose. More often than not, it is however much you may put the system in place, it is the women. I know friends for the last 25 years, the ones who have chosen to drop off the ladder are the ones who made the choice for themselves. Because again, that crisis of social, I will not be a good mother if I don't now make that sacrifice out of my own internal wanting to do it. Hello. I will not be a good daughter-in-law, I will not be a good wife, maybe I'll not be a great partner. That is an internal thing. You cannot, however much, but we do have to bring up the system, and we are changing the system to a large extent to change that attitude, but it is in the mind. It has to begin changing in the mind, and maybe from cosmopolitan cities. You may know better.
Yeah, so I'll just take it up from where you left and where Nandan left. You're very right. When I look back at my medical college days, we were 25 of us girls, and only about 6 are doing serious work today. And voluntarily dropped off for the children. Voluntarily, and then never got back. When you ask them, they say, my husband's doing so well, I don't need to do it.
Yes.
And as far as Nandan's comment on maternity leave is concerned, a few years back, Google came up with the policy of funding egg freezing for their employees. And it's a big debate even today whether this is, gender equality, or is it actually increasing gender bias, because you are getting forward a point that this person is not equal till she goes and freezes her eggs. that means that if you have to do well in your career, there is a line drawn there that please go and freeze your eggs, only then we know you're committed to your work. So there was a huge debate on this, there was a huge ethical debate, it still carries on whether it is a good policy or it's not a good policy, it is increasing the gender bias. So I don't know, I would like to take the opinion of the House on whether it is gender bias or
Can
not.
I also say that there is a lot of hut required? Hut is the Hindi word, stubbornness, to stick to science, to do what you're doing. My youngest, we are 3 sisters, my younger sisters both got married before me. There was no chance for me, everybody had given up on me. I mean, in India, if you're not, and I'm from Haryana, so if you don't get married in the early 20s, there's no hope for you at all. I chose to get married in my 30s, I chose to have my kids late 30s, and I'm quite okay today. The thing is, at that time you don't know. At that time you're really realizing that how I've let down the whole system. I didn't do what was expected. But if you some of us who have come through is also because of our stubbornness that let the world say whatever it is, I'm going to do this because call me whatever, I'm going to do this, and so I'm here. And I think that is another factor.
So is it the woman's fault or the fault of the society?
I feel like we could have a whole other panel discussion just on that question, to be honest. In the interest of time, I'm going to take one final question that I can see there's been a hand up for a while, and then I'm going to come back to the panel for some final comments in a particular vein.
Thank you. Very fascinating discussion. My name is Ravi Bhuthalingam. I studied psychology many decades ago, but I do some work now in executive and student counseling and coaching. So my question is this, that Dr. Gitanjali, you mentioned, and Nandan also mentioned, that girls at a certain stage, though they excel in so many things, start losing the momentum and their confidence because they start saying, I can't be a mother, I can't be a wife, etc., and carry on with.
Not losing confidence.
Losing.
It's the crisis of social expectations.
Okay, they are not able to manage the social expectation. So my question is this, has any of you found somewhere, are there psychological interventions that anybody is doing systematically at that stage of the educational ladder to tell these girls, look, it is not that you can't do it. This is something in your head, this fear. These are the ways it can be tackled. These are the examples of people who have tackled it. So, just as you can tackle a difficult math sum or remember poetry or whatever else you do, or play football, you can do this. So, are there any guidance programs or interventions for girls that are happening anywhere which can nip this thing in the bud or at least make a dent on it?
Who'd like to take that one first?
No, I just wanted to say, I think that's a very unique idea and it should come into place. I think Cambridge needs to come up with a program on that. But it is very much needed. I mean, it's a unique idea that at that stage you have a counseling session and you get the girls to say that, okay, we are going ahead, whatever may happen.
That they have a problem. They don't agree with it. They choose.
No, you don't address a problem. You address the girl at that stage. You don't address the problem.
I mean, I would say we do have gender-specific mentoring at Cambridge. I think if you were to have, it's probably societally different. You would never be able to have a mentoring program in Cambridge where you sort of talk to women about their, getting married and having children. That would actually just not be something that you could do, because it's not something that we bring up because I guess figure it puts additional pressure on people. I sometimes have informal, I give talks, I'm quite involved in the Women in Science agenda, and the informal discussions and advice I give to my female students is that just be careful who you choose as your partner, because I think that is the most critical decision you will make for your career. You need to choose a partner that is going to be supportive of your career and not undermining of your career, and I think you can do anything you like with the rest of society, but that is the critical decision. In the UK context, of course, in India, I think you stay much closer to your extended family, and so there may be social pressure from your extended family that we just don't feel so much in the UK?
I have a reasonably self-serving answer to that. Just get all girls to play sport. So there's actually a study in the US. They did a study of hundreds of CXOs who were women. So CXOs, CEO, CFO, any of the C-suite executives. They found that over 80% had played youth sport, which had sort of, I mean, I'm associating business leadership with progressing.
What was the control
intent.
group? What percentage of people that weren't in the C-suite played sport?
I don't think they did that. So it was an Ernst & Young study published a few
Nandan,
years.
I have to agree here this time with you. I was a national level swimmer when I was in school. My daughter is a basketball player, and we insist that even if she doesn't get scores in school, she has to have a sport that she does take. But to answer your question, particularly for India, we have mentoring programs called the Vigyan Vidushi, called the Gati, as well as several others which have been started by the Ministry of HRD as well as the Ministry of Science and Tech. And we as scientists, it's part of my, what do you call it? It's an annual progress APAR. A part of my annual APAR, if I am a tenure track scientist in India, is how many girls and their parents did I go and meet in this year and try to get the parents to understand how important it is for the girl to continue. Haryana girls are always into sports, but I swear to you, in the last 18 years of my profession, I've made sure that many of these Haryana girls come to my lab and become scientists and get away from this, that Mahendragarh and Rewari and Bhiwani, where it's either sport, yes, there's a huge regard for sport, or else shadi karo. So I call them to my lab and I send them off to Cambridge and I send them off to Oxford, and they don't return, and they've had a life. At least this is the small bit I have done on my own by telling my story and insisting that so I'm biased, yes, I have more girls in my lab, and they are more from Haryana, but truly, Haryana also recognized this, and there was this Vigyan Ratan. Instead of the Sports Ratan, there's also Vigyan Ratan. I'm the first awardee of the Vigyan Ratan, and my entire village got in trucks and came. All my international awards and national awards, I don't care, because that little Haryana Vigyan Ratan, when I got it, the Sarpanch came, the truck full of men and women and children came to see कि बुड्ढा साहब हमारे गांव की लड़की को award दे रहे हैं. I believe that these are things that encourage, and Haryana is actually leading in encouraging girls and women to a large extent. But we all have to do a little bit, absolutely.
I mean, I think we could probably carry on for the rest of the evening, but in the interest of letting our panellists get on, and to let you all get on as well, I'm going to have to draw things to a close. There's been a lot that's been brought up, a lot of things that are quite difficult to talk about, challenging things that people go through, that women go through. But I want to end on a positive note. I'd really like if each of you could just give me one thing that you are optimistic about for the future of women in your field, in society in general. Just one thing that we can all take away that you are optimistic about. Surveen.
So I think I am optimistic about women getting empowered about their reproduction, not being just their reproduction. I see women telling their husbands that, look, you are equally responsible. And this never used to happen a few years ago, but when they sit in front of me, I see them saying that, look, you're equally responsible. So I look towards an India where it would be equal for both.
I'm optimistic when I see an increasing number of men calling out sexist behaviour, and I'm definitely seeing that.
Yeah, I think I'm just optimistic about Indian women's sport. We already have a pretty balanced Olympic contingent. And I think that we're going to reach a point where over 60% of women are going to be on our contingent and winning more than 50% of our medals already. So.
In addition to all the other points, completely agreed on those, I'm optimistic about data science, about more and more women coming and saying we want to be data scientists. In the past, it used to be engineers to ladke hi honge, boys, the data scientists, the machine learners, the AI guys. Right now, it's more and more girls, and we do a lot of trainings. We've done one right here in the Habitat Center for 2 days to train women, whoever walks in, to become data practitioners and to learn coding and to do data science with simple kinds of data, tabular data, any kind of data that you might be having, textual data and genomic data and so on. And I see hope that it's going to continue. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for those final words of optimism. Thank you also for all of your expertise, the discussion. I'm sure we'll all go away with a lot to think about. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. I'm sorry if there were questions we didn't get to answer. And thank you to the hosts for having us this evening.
Thank you to all the panelists and for Vibhuti to really, leading the discussion really well. Thank you so much to Hearth Advisors. This is our second lecture. I was blown away with our inaugural lecture because it was so fascinating. It started with AI, but it moved from edutech to access to technology to education. And I think today has been even more brilliant in terms of discussion and the diversity of perspectives that it has brought through. So this is a series that we are very thrilled about. All of you, please spread the word. Our third session is on 21st of November. So we do it every third Tuesday of the month. And it is on diversifying paths to financial inclusion. And I'm sure we'll have a great panel then too. So do spread the word and please be there. Thank you for being a lovely audience and for bringing really, really interesting questions.